Well, folks, today is the day I stopped being a Philistine. You're listening to the Rocinante podcast. I'm Sean P. McCarthy here with Angela Nagel, and I've been trying to expand my horizons and learn how to have conversations with people that aren't about building seven. So I've begun my journey towards being cultured, and Angela's going to help me with that. So we wanted to talk today about Caravaggio, both the man and his work, but also the state of modern art and culture. But before we get there, we would both encourage you to become a premium subscriber. You can do so either at patreon.com/Rocinantepod, ROCINANTEPOD, or at Angela Nagel's Substack, angelanagel.substack.com. Over there, we'll have a current event episode as well as our monthly subscriber question and answer episode for you to listen to. Back to Caravaggio. Angela and I both watched the 1975 Robert Hughes documentary on Caravaggio, which is available on YouTube. We'll have a link in the description. And I have some notes here to discuss the life of the man. But before we get there, I just wanted to ask Angela if you could start by just telling the listeners a little bit about Robert Hughes, the Australian art critic and documentary filmmaker, just a little about his life and what you admire about him.
Yeah, so I think I really liked this very high quality, I guess, educational television, where you would have a three-part or a six-part like a series on something like art or even cuisine. I think of something like Keith Floyd, who kind of revolutionized food television, I guess. And then I've mentioned before, Sister Wendy, these kinds of people. I always really liked that growing up, and I used to watch all that stuff. And I kind of instantly liked Robert Hughes, and I talk about him a lot. One thing I've always tried to do, I didn't really think it through rationally, but looking back, sort of one of the things that I've always tried to do for many years is um, popularize or revive a figure who I think deserves credit. And he's one of them. I sort of want to get him to catch on in some way. It's very satisfying when that happens, when you try to do that and then it sort of works. Sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it works. But in his case, he's just very interesting because um, I think that he's a nice alternative to the dichotomy that's very unsatisfying that you often get, where one side does like really traditional art, kind of let's just make everything look like the past stuff. Um, and then the other side just refuses to recognize that there's anything lacking in the modern art world. Um, and that's, a typical kind of culture war dynamic, where this fight goes over and back and it kind of goes nowhere. Because, of course, what you want is something that is futuristic and beautiful, uh, that can match the past, but that is still something new, right? Because creative people want to do something new. They don't want to just repeat the styles of the past. So anyway, he kind of represents to me a very nice, tasteful alternative to those two options, which is basically he's most famous for a TV series, which was also a visual art book called The Shock of the New, which was a history of modern art. And what I like about him is that he really gives modern art its due, and he is very discerning, and he is somebody who is able to say this is good and this is bad, you know what I mean? And not kind of have to get some ideological guidance to decide these things. So he's very, very discerning and is extremely harsh sometimes, and not others. And and then I guess he also is able to see when elements of modern art are basically fake avant-gardism. Like, he was very harsh in that kind of style of criticism. Like, he would say, if you copy the style of a stylistic innovator like 100 years later, you're not doing anything avant-garde anymore, but you still want the kudos or whatever of being an original person. So that I really liked that element of him, that he I always was very irritated by something that was clearly repetitive and stale, but kind of tried to mimic the outward appearance, but not the spirit of past avant-gardism. And he articulated that perfectly. And he could turn to almost any subject and always be full of really brilliant um, observations and funny connections that you hadn't thought of before, and all that stuff. He was just a great character. He's Australian, the same generation as Germaine Greer and people like that. And he came to New York and kind of made it big as an art critic there. So yeah, that's more or less the background. I just feel that he's somebody who has really done all of this stuff very well, and I'm kind of he deserves to be remembered. Along with somebody like Camille Paglia. I think they're like my two favorite art commentators at that time.
Well, I really enjoyed the Robert Hughes Caravaggio documentary. It taught me a lot, and what I found so fascinating about Caravaggio, besides the work itself, is just basically all we know about Caravaggio comes from the art, his paintings, and then just his court cases. Like the only extended commentary we have from Caravaggio is, his depositions when he's in court. And I like the Robert Hughes documentary. It quoted extensively from the court transcripts of just random people in Rome testifying that they were walking around at 3 a.m. and then suddenly they saw they were like beaten with a stick, and then they saw a guy who was Caravaggio fleeing towards the Cardinal Del Monte's palace where his patron was, and just like repeated instances like that. Yeah, I find the man and his work so fascinating. But a kind of same question to you with regards to Caravaggio. What do you admire about Caravaggio, and what draws you to his work?
Well, I think there is actually kind of a special relationship with Ireland, actually, because his painting, "The Taking of Christ," is in the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin. And the reason is that it had been lost. I think for centuries it had been lost, and it was assumed to be gone, missing forever. And then in the 90s, it was rediscovered in a Jesuit residence in Dublin. And it was hanging in the dining room of a Jesuit community. And then it was authenticated as the original, and it's in the National Gallery now. And so that's like an interesting story, but and it really stands out when you go to the National Gallery. It's like it's extraordinary to see. And so I think then in terms of the what interests me about him, I mean, there's like, I suppose, the stuff that everyone admires about him, that you could kind of find in any description. But to me, he's a figure that kind of brings up a lot of interesting questions, because it reminds me of the fact that basically all kind of art and culture, and even maybe more academic and intellectual work, is probably, without the person producing it being fully aware, some kind of soft power. And so he was very much soft power for the Catholic Church in the context of the Counter-Reformation. So, just think this kind of huge institution is being challenged in a really fundamental, possibly fatal way by Protestantism, because at the root of it, the Protestants are basically right, in the sense that this is not sticking to the text or whatever. It's not an accurate. They've added on quite a lot of stuff that's not in the text, and the institution is not is something entirely constructed by them. And once you accept that, you kind of have to accept that the whole thing is illegitimate. So there's this absolutely fundamental challenge to them, and they have to come up with a way to counter that. So how do you do that, right? And the reason that comes to mind is because, if you think of something like, famously the CIA funded modern art, and today kind of there is this crisis of legitimacy where I imagine, all kinds of people in the Western kind of governing elite are desperately trying to find that soft power that they did so well during the Cold War, with pop music and all that kind of stuff. So Caravaggio is sort of like the equivalent of that. Like, I'm sure he doesn't think of himself in that way, but nonetheless, so you have to, when you're trying to find that extra, when you're trying to find that that soft power that can really go above and beyond just kind of mannerism, as it was called, just sort of, or just painting the stories. You have to do something that's really going to completely blow people away. It leaves you with this kind of contradiction, this conundrum of soft power, which is that people who want power need to force others to bend to their will, to accept their legitimacy, accept their ideas. But the problem is that the magic that they need to make that happen can only come from these kind of antisocial, creative, nonconformist types. So that leaves power with this conundrum all the time, where on the one hand, they want to just, crush everyone who challenges them. But on the other hand, they know that there's this kind of, lightning that they have to capture in a bottle, kind of, this magical force that they can't just crush it completely, or else they have no they have no soft power, basically. So that's actually why he interests me. It's not just the kind of stylistic stuff. It's really just that maybe eternal question of how you take antisocial, dark forces and channel them into something brilliant.
Yeah, your discussion on soft power just gave me the horrifying realization that Mr. Beast is our modern Caravaggio. But I wanted to kind of circle back to that, because I think it's so fascinating. I found one of your old Substacks you wrote in 2021, "Can You Fight the Illiterate Future?" And you reviewed an article where the author discusses the current revival of Catholicism, which we're actually seeing more and more. I believe France just for Easter they baptized more Catholics than they had since 20 years previous. But that was driven by the rise of the rise of the Protestant faith was driven by literacy and the printing press. And now that we're kind of moving away from literacy and people are, going to TikTok or YouTube, or they're not reading long form books anymore. Everything's kind of a visual medium. Now we're kind of moving away from that literacy that gave Protestantism its initial current. And so you're getting a lot of different consequences, one of which is the revival of Catholicism, but this kind of focus on image is another consequence. And it just kind of, it does make me wonder if we're swimming against the stream, trying to substack and trying to have discussions that have some depth to them. But I think there's obviously a lot of value in trying to do that. But
even
I would like to
doing things like
ahead.
even doing something like, the way that we're having like an individual image for every show. Like, I think you can kind of take those things seriously as well and kind of try to do a bit of both. But certainly, yeah, the idea that, the visual culture of the Catholic Church was created for illiterate people,
Well, that's something I'd very much like to return to, because I think it's a very fascinating topic, just in terms of art in the modern age and this cultural power and where it's going. But I have a little Cliff Notes biography of Caravaggio So I'll go through that for the benefit of the listeners who maybe don't know. And if Angela, if you want to jump in at any point you find interesting, please do. But he was born Michelangelo Merisi, and Caravaggio was just the town that he grew up in, and it wasn't actually his given birth name. He was born in Milan in 1571. His father was an administrator and architect, decorator to the Marquis of Caravaggio, which is about 22 miles east of Milan. The family moves, when he's 5 years old in 1576, the family moves to Caravaggio to escape the plague. His father and his grandfather die there in 1577. His mother raises 5 children in poverty. She dies in 1584, which is also the same year that he begins a 4-year art apprenticeship in Milan with Simone Petrosano. 1588, this apprenticeship ends. He sells some lands that he inherited, and he heads to Rome. And then there's various stories as to why he leaves Milan to go to Rome. Allegedly, he had to flee after quote-unquote quarrels, where maybe a police officer was wounded. There's other allegations he had to leave because he committed a murder in Milan. But regardless, he arrives in Rome in 1592 at 21 years old. And I do actually find this fascinating, just as like somebody who like moved to New York to try stand-up comedy and this kind of thing, is that even in the late 1500s, this kind of dream of moving to the big city to be an artist was it existed. It was just quite different. Where if you wanted to actually make your living as an artist in Rome in the late 1500s, early 1600s, I mean, you basically had to work with the church. That was, there were other wealthy patrons, but it was kind of a situation where the church, they were building many new churches in Rome, and there were many wealthy people building palaces and mansions as well. So they all needed art to fill these, and that was how you could actually still scratch out a living as a creative or artistic type in those days.
Yeah, I guess it was probably like Hollywood, right? Like if you wanted to do anything in film, that's where you had to go.
Right. Yeah. Same amount of pederasty too. But which, like, Robert Hughes does mention in the documentary. Well, we'll get to Cardinal Del Monte in just a second. But so Caravaggio is 21 years old. 1592, he arrives in Rome. He gets work in like a factory-like workshop for Giuseppe Cesari, who was Pope Clement VIII's favorite artist. And Caravaggio is just kind of in a mechanical way churning out these prints of, flowers and fruit and these types of things. Though he does a painting I quite like, Young Sick Bacchus. He does that during this time, which people who are smarter than me, art critics who are smarter than me, whose opinions I'm now borrowing, they make the observation that Young Sick Bacchus kind of represents sex and death at the same time, because Bacchus has this kind of carnal look of seeking pleasure or whatever, but is also clearly sick, clearly dying. And people say that Caravaggio was sick around this time. He might have modeled that on himself. And the contrast between sex and death is kind of a constant in art, but you do see it in Caravaggio's work a lot. And it's it's just kind of, people say that Caravaggio invented kind of modern art, and you can really see why. But so he leaves the Giuseppe Cesari's workshop during a heated argument. After a heated argument, he gets this interest in Roman street life, the scenes of the common people. Like, he apparently would see like gypsies on the street and, bring them in to paint them, doing the Fortune Teller is like a painting that he completes during this time. Gypsies, card sharks, these sorts of common people that you would see in the streets of Rome. And apparently the card sharps, or like people cheating and thieving from each other. But the Card Sharps is a painting that he completes during this time, which attracts him the patronage of the wealthy Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte, or Cardinal del Monte, in 1595. And Cardinal del Monte is the most important patron he has. He's extremely wealthy in Rome, and he's sort of the one who gets Caravaggio the opportunities that he has. But yeah, as I was just mentioning earlier, Robert Hughes refers to Cardinal Del Monte as a pederast, and that's, a charitable description, I guess. But it's Cardinal Del Monte seemed to want Caravaggio to paint like young men or young boys for him. Like he was a cultured man. He had an actual interest in art and everything, but that does seem to be part of the commissions that Caravaggio did for Cardinal Del Monte. And like from what I've read about it, Roman attitudes towards homosexuality, they had anti-sodomy laws at this time. You could be, put to death for being homosexual, but it generally was not considered homosexuality for an older man to be with, a young, not fully developed man. Like they wouldn't even think of that as homosexuality. Or Caravaggio would be like in modern times described as a bisexual, but that's just not, it's not a societal attitude that he would have understood at all. He just, he liked women, but, being interested in women was considered completely separate, I guess, from having a young male lover. It was just kind of homosexuality at that time in Rome was mostly just considered two men of the same age or two grown men having intercourse rather than one older and one younger man for whatever the reason. But yeah, no, it kind of got me thinking like Cardinal Del Monte, having Caravaggio paint all these young boys for him. I don't know if like maybe just kind of the invention of pornography is what keeps someone like Peter Thiel from having an actual artist do that type of thing for him. But
hey, be careful. He could sue you for that.
Yeah, he could throw me off the balcony in Miami and kill me. But yeah, I mean, and so Cardinal Del Monte is extremely wealthy, extremely influential, and he's the one who protects Caravaggio. And as we were mentioning earlier, like he's the one. Cardinal Del Monte is why Caravaggio gets the commission for the Contarelli Chapel in Rome, where he gets the commission to paint 3 scenes from the life of St. Matthew: the calling of St. Matthew, the inspiration of St. Matthew, the martyrdom of St. Matthew. And he gets this commission in 1599. It's unveiled in 1600, and then from 1600 to his death in 1610, Caravaggio is famous, and his talents are always in demand. But that was sort of what would be called his big break. He gets this because of Cardinal Del Monte, and then he spends the rest of the short decade that he's alive being quite rich, quite famous, and just getting in a lot of trouble and having court cases all the time. And as we were mentioning earlier, these testimonies of people saying Caravaggio attacked them late at night, they would often see him fleeing towards Cardinal Del Monte's palace because that was Del Monte was his sponsor, and he was for a while able to keep Caravaggio out of trouble and protect him.
Yeah. One little footnote on the Cardinal Del Monte thing. It is actually disputed that he was a pederast. Maybe he was. I mean, maybe he was. I don't know. But it is something that's disputed. It's interpreted from kind of circumstantial evidence, and it's not. There's no. So he may not be. It may. I don't want to just call him a pederast just because Robert Hughes did say that.
But that's the best part of having a podcast. No, it is interesting because, like, when we talk about these figures like Caravaggio, where the historical record is so spotty and so much of it is just inference and this kind of thing. I mean, obviously, when it comes to art criticism, I'm out of my depth. So I'll just, I'll rely on the word of Robert Hughes, or I read this book by Francine Prose, just a short book on Caravaggio, but she also takes it as a given that Cardinal Del Monte was a pederast. So
it's entirely possible. It's simply that I read somewhere else when I went to check it that it was disputed. But that's also, I'm sure the real experts on this stuff who probably go to the Caravaggio, probably go to a Caravaggio conference every year and have dedicate their entire careers to nothing but talking about Caravaggio. They probably like revise each other's histories, all the time. So with competing evidence and whatnot. So that's kind of how these things change.
And it's interesting. I also found an older article from The Guardian from, I believe, 2010 that you linked on your Substack that talked about lead paint poisoning as one possible explanation for Caravaggio's behavior. And in the article, they also this is a common theory with regards to Van Gogh and Goya as well, where Van Gogh is like everyone who ever met him remembers him as an asshole or very, standoffish. Goya, of course, like had his really dark period towards the end, and Caravaggio is just such a brawler. And it's, one interpretation would be artists are, difficult people or whatever the case may be. But another possible explanation is these people were suffering from severe lead poisoning, which we do know makes people more violent, more aggressive, more standoffish, lowers their impulse control, these sorts of things.
Yeah, because the behavior is strange. I mean, I know people who are antisocial or who are violent, but with him, it's sort of hard to. It seems like he was always just randomly like self-sabotaging and just starting violent outbursts, like for no reason that anyone can explain, Like it's not even like they are random. Like it's not even like the person had done something that was, that challenged him or was like deeply offensive to him. It was always random outbursts. And even like Hughes goes through this this bit of the story, which you probably get to, but where he's in Malta.
Mm-hmm.
And so because back then, news didn't travel so fast, he was able to kind of outrun his reputation a little bit for a while until it caught up with him. But by the time he was only there, I think he only got to do certainly one well-known painting, maybe a few paintings. And then he got into another violent confrontation with one of his own, like the institution that was supporting him, and then he had to flee again. So he just had to constantly flee from these violent outbursts that he was doing,
Right, he fought a Knight of Malta.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem like something you want to do if you want to stay alive a long time, but and it's interesting, like even this was noticed even by his contemporaries, which, Rome in the early 1600s, there were lots of brawls. I mean, it was a violent place, but he even stood out by the standards of the time. But there's this 1604 notice about Caravaggio. And so, as we were saying, by 1600, he's rich and famous. And so 4 years later, they noticed that he's fallen into this pattern. And the 1604 notice says, quote, "After a fortnight's work, he will swagger about for a month or two with a sword at his side and a servant following him from one ball court to the next, ever ready to engage in a fight or an argument, so that it is most awkward to get along with him." And I also pulled from your Substack, Angela, there was a BBC article from 2011, which just has a list of some of the Rome police files about Caravaggio's legal incidents, which I'll just read a few of here. In May 1598, arrested at 2 to 3 a.m. for carrying a sword without a permit. November 1600, sued for beating a man with a stick and tearing his cape with a sword at 3 a.m. October 1601, a man accuses Caravaggio of his friends of insulting him and attacking him with a sword. April 1604, waiter complains of assault after serving artichokes at an inn to Caravaggio. October 1604, Caravaggio arrested for throwing stones at policemen. May 1605, Caravaggio arrested for carrying a sword and dagger without a permit. July 1605, Vatican notary accuses Caravaggio of striking him from behind with a weapon. And then in May 1606, Caravaggio kills a man. And this is why he eventually has to flee Rome. The man that he killed, Ranuccio Tomasani, was a gangster from a wealthy family, and Caravaggio kills him in May 1606. The actual circumstances of that are another topic of dispute, but he was wealthy enough that Caravaggio's patrons, like Cardinal Del Monte, could no longer protect him, and Caravaggio was given a death sentence and had to flee Rome. He goes to Naples, and then he goes to Malta. One variant of the story has it happening over an argument over a game of pala, which is similar to tennis. Another says that he was jealous over Filede Melandroni, was a Roman prostitute that modeled for Caravaggio, but the man that he killed was supposedly her pimp. So there's a few different stories of it. But as we were mentioning, he goes to Naples, then he goes to Malta. In Malta, he arrives there in 1607. They love him at first. He's reportedly gifted 2 slaves as thanks for his work. In 1608, during this period, he completes the beheading of St. John. And then in August 1608, as we mentioned, he's arrested because he started a fight with a Knight of Malta. He has to escape Malta. He goes to Sicily for 9 months. Then he returns to Naples. And during this kind of 1608 to 1610 period, or 1609 to 1610, is when he paints David holding the head of, or David with the head of Goliath is the name of the painting, and that's one of my favorites. And
Yeah, me
the
too.
detail that was so fascinating about it, and Francine Prose alerted me to this, and I know this is also disputed, but one possible detail in David with the head of Goliath is that David is modeled on the younger Caravaggio, and the beheaded Goliath is modeled on the older Caravaggio. And just knowing that he painted this when he was on the run, under a sentence of death, being hunted by the Knights of Malta, and it just kind of, it's a very interesting allegory for his choices as a younger man haunting and killing him as an older man.
And I will say that it does look, actually, the faces do look like the younger and older version of the same person. So I find it a plausible theory.
But yeah, and this is pretty much the end of Caravaggio's life here. He's on the run. He starts heading back towards Rome because he has expectation that he's going to get a pardon. He lands at Porto Ercole, which is about 100 miles from Rome, a port. He's briefly arrested there, where he catches malaria. He's released after 2 days, but the boat that had took him in there, it had left while he was imprisoned, and that boat had all of his worldly possessions, all of his art, all of his money, everything. And then he dies there in 1610 at the age of 39, and the actual cause of death also still in dispute, but his pardon, according to Robert Hughes, arrived from Rome 3 days after his death.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think it's really it's the greatness of the work itself, but also just like the reason that he comes to mind so often is because I always think, if such a person was alive today, who would have the wisdom and vision to be able to channel that antisocial energy into excellence, into something that nobody else can really do. And also, because we're kind of going from this really strict period of people always being in trouble for, saying or doing the wrong thing, and now it's sort of swinging in the other direction. On one side, when taboos are very strongly enforced, you can end up missing these potentially great people who might be antisocial, but that antisocial quality in them will produce genius. It is like half of the equation they need to produce genius. So you're in danger of just crushing all of those people. But then when things swing back in the other direction, you're in danger of doing the opposite thing, which is that an antisocial personality with no channeling will just go and simply be a violent murderer. They won't do anything else, So the real magic is when you have these patrons who themselves are not painters or whatever it might be, but for whatever reason they have the the clarity of vision, the taste, the willingness to be open-minded to risk and, maybe something slightly disturbing or unsettling, but also able to channel it into something great, so that it's not just like, the kind of stuff that Robert Hughes sort of made fun of, even though he was very, uh, he revered modern art in general, but he did make fun of the kind of very low effort, sort of, just trying to be offensive but not really offending anyone crap, basically. That you need to also have the element where the antisocial forces are channeled into something. So that might be something like even competitiveness, right? Like one of the things that made the Renaissance, which came before this, but they were operating in Rome that had been shaped by it. They made artists into immortal living gods, basically, like celebrities, like who are so famous that you could just know them by one name, one word. And so by doing that, you kind of channel like competitive male energy very well, because they want to be the best, and it's a way of beating all the others to be the best. And all that kind of stuff. Like there are many ways to think about that, but that sort of magic of getting that right is really, I think, has to be like the essence of why there are golden ages and fallow periods,
It is interesting about our modern age. I mean, you used to have to make great art to kind of get an excuse for your antisocial behavior, but now you can just be famous for having antisocial behavior. So we get these Andrew Tates that is just Caravaggio's personality, but no talent or no give back to the world at all. But that's just, I guess the age of the video internet is these people can just have the most abrasive antisocial personality and make that a marketing gimmick or make that something that kind of draws them to people because they seem like rebels from society.
Right. But wasn't Andrew Tate some kind of like a kickboxer or like an MMA fighter or something before?
Very, very briefly, yeah.
I don't know if he was he good? I mean, was he like, did he
not
get far?
particularly, no.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I
Well,
was going to say,
even in that sense, he at least managed to channel that, right? Before you could just become an e-celeb, he did channel that into something that did require skill and stuff like that, right? But now it's like, why would you bother? Because you can just talk to a camera.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was wondering, like, I mean, and this is a big question, but so we kind of lack these modern stewards of culture. I mean, so in Caravaggio's time, it would mainly be the church, and then these various wealthy patrons, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller. I mean, obviously these were not great people, but they did seem to have some sort of need to give back, some sort of sense of their own legacy. And I'm just kind of wondering, is the modern lack of these stewards of culture, do you think it's an inevitable consequence of the decline of religion, both in the sense that there's no strong church to kind of be a patron of the arts, but also, I mean, maybe these J.P. Morgans, Rockefellers, maybe they actually did believe in God. Maybe they thought they would have some sort of obligation to their legacy, to future generations, and kind of, these modern Peter Thiels or whatever just want to live forever. I don't think they believe in any sort of afterlife. So I don't know. It's a big question, but I'm curious what you think about it.
Well, I guess like this has been commented upon by many others, but Art Deco kind of stands as like a contradiction there, because to a lot of other existing theories about kind of the decline of aesthetics generally, because it was quite modern, secular. In the American version, even kind of capitalist is maybe not the right thing, right? Because all kinds of systems produced cars, but I had in mind the Chrysler Building, for example. But modernity, basically, industrial modernity. It was a style that was meant to showcase and kind of I guess, create some grandeur around the promise of industrial modernity. And also that means that, it's not produced by aristocrats or the church, who had always been, almost all the great art in world history is produced by these two classes. So in modern society, that leaves you with a problem, right? You've basically cut out, you've like killed in many cases, like, or at least massively diminished like these two classes. And so can you even create great art anymore? But then I suppose the next point that somebody might, like a counter argument might be, okay, well, Art Deco was trying to answer that question. Like, it was very deliberately trying to be an answer to that question. Like, if you get rid of these old art patron classes, like, can industrial modernity really produce anything equivalent to all the great cathedrals and so on? So you could argue that, well, yes, the existence of Art Deco just proves that you need those classes, but on the other hand, it was still an echo that was deliberately conscious of trying to be an answer to that. So maybe if enough time passes, there won't even be anything like that ever again. And that's a very open question for me. I mean, I'm not convinced. I think sometimes you need to put bad news in front of people as a way to inspire, a resistance to it, like as a horrible future. But I think that it should be considered that we could easily slip into a future where there's just no, really magnificent, beautiful art ever again. Because there is no reason for it to exist ever again, really. And one of the reasons is that, tech is really the only, just producing technology is really the only thing left. Any last remnants of those old classes are gone. And when there's no numinous or like a transcendent divine element there to dedicate art to, it's going to take on a much more shallow and silly kind of form. And, there's cinema, which, really, I definitely think that you should always embrace the future when it comes to art. So, I mean, obviously cinema, was the great art form and long for, and like, television too, right? Because of those kind of HBO style, really long dramas. They reached a real peak of excellence. But right now, that's kind of gone too, right? I mean, it's still there, but when anyone just like dancing in front of a camera can compete with these incredibly expensive dramas that are really, really hard, difficult to produce, why would you bother producing them, basically, right? I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I remember reading once that kind of Big Brother style of television, a lot of that kind of non-written television was a product of a writer's strike. So, they will, of course, do the cheapest thing, because the market, if the market is the only pressurizing force there, there's no reason not to. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we should consider the possibility that there's no reason for beauty on that scale to ever be made again.
And that, it does lead into the next question, which is what would happen to a modern Caravaggio? And I guess my theory would be he would be an IRL Twitch streamer that just assaults people at 1 a.m. and gets like, $5 donations. He'd be like Baked Alaska, where he would go and harass service workers and people would pay him $10 to have the N-word read on his stream or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
But
I mean, why would you bother if that was like the nature of your personality? What would cause somebody like that to channel such focus and energy into this fine, like, excellence in art? And I don't know. I mean, I'm open to changing my mind or whatever, to hearing different theories, but based on what I do know and what kind of seems apparent to me, I think it is the fact that he still existed in this world created by the Medici, where people competed for just like once the knights, right, that he was fighting, like, wanted to be the greatest, um, the greatest swordsman or whatever. Like, this was the thing. Like, being an artist was the most revered, highly competitive, the highest thing you could possibly reach. And the Medici did that very deliberately. And I've often thought that if the 60s really were designed rather than organic, I've often thought that the designers of it may have understood this and tried to recreate it with the rock star, like the idea that there were these men who would be kind of worshipped and held up as idols, and they would have, would be so revered, and of course have all of the sexual opportunity and so on, that the designers of the 60s may have repeated the Medici formula, because it is noteworthy that it dies instantly when the Berlin Wall goes down. Like, there's like almost nothing equivalent. There's nothing like equivalent to like the Rolling Stones or whatever, after
Right.
that point.
They had to kill Kurt Cobain to finish it off.
Yeah, like he was sort of the final one, and then after that, it's just like absolute garbage. Um, that's just a theory. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's just interesting to me that the dates are so perfect. Like, it really is like bookended by the beginning and end of the Cold War, and because the reason this is on my mind is that I'm kind of trying to write this book. I started it a good while ago, but I'm always finding these kind of problems where I have to rethink a theory that was sort of making sense to me at some point. And the basic idea is like I'm trying to look at all the theories that exist and then see like which are the most convincing for some kind of formula of golden ages of art and culture. Like, why do they come about? And I'm not interested in the kind of guns, germs, and steel type of analysis. I'm looking at like rational human intervention, like designs. Like, I feel that there is design there, and when you look at the Medici, you can see that that's true. So that just occurs to me, like if somebody, you're trying to fight the Cold War, you've got these incredibly smart, talented people there deep in the state apparatus in America, and they see the amazing moral, and power and inspirational power of the communist message, the liberation of all mankind. That's like, how do you compete with that, And so they maybe looked at this old conflict in the past where the Medici, or well, then say later on with the Counter-Reformation, they had to come up with something that could simply override people's rational, text-based kind of understanding of the world, that they would simply be so mesmerized by culture that they would forget, and maybe that's what they did. Maybe they were fully aware of that, and they really just rationally tried to apply the Renaissance formula to that problem and the Counter-Reformation formula.
There's two books that are related to that I own and I need an excuse to read. But have you read Who Paid the Piper? It's about the CIA and the Cultural Cold War.
No, it's
the other one.
Yeah, sorry.
The other one's Acid Dreams. It's just about the CIA role in the LSD. I mean, the spread of LSD in the United States, and kind of the rock culture that went with that.
No, I haven't, but the first one has been recommended to me many times. I've always meant to read it. We could do another show about it, actually. I think it's kind of something that would really interest both of us.
Yeah, and I think the listeners would like that as well. So, we'll put a pin in that, but that's something I would like to come back to. Okay, so we were talking about, and you mentioned this about the arts kind of having changed, because I've noticed this occasionally. If you ask somebody today, who their favorite artist is, I've noticed a lot of times they'll say a musician. Like, people are less interested in, painting or the visual arts than they were in the past. So, I guess my question for you would be like, have the arts simply changed and we're behind the times, or has something been lost that needs to be revitalized with kind of the general decline in interest in, like, let's say, painting or visual art as a medium?
Well, I would kind of categorize things mainly into sort of text, image, sound.
Hmm.
That kind of more or less covers everything, and sometimes it's two or three, at the same time. But so it is undoubtedly true that painting as a form is more or less dead. I mean, people still want paintings, on their walls, and there's still interesting things to paint, but simply just by the progression of technology, it has been surpassed by other things. So film, and television. But I don't know, has there been a kind of internet age um, passing of the baton on from that? I can't really think of what that is, in terms of drama, visual art, that comes after that. Like there's still actually occasionally good film and television, but I struggle to think of an internet like equivalent of that is as good. Can you?
In terms of what art form?
Well, if you think about it in terms of let's say we accept that, photography comes along and painting is dead, or then film comes along and photography is dead, and so forth. If we're if we're past film, if the internet just is the fact of like, if it is the technology that like defines our age, is there an internet specific art form that is the next stage on from what came before? Because
Well,
I mean,
it is.
yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, if you asked me that a decade ago, I would say memes. But it's interesting to me, like how stagnant meme culture has become. I mean, it's just
Mm,
unbearable. It's kind of recycling everything from a decade ago.
mm,
Whereas I think a decade ago, there was, this anonymous culture that made these forms that did express real, human experiences and
mm.
connections and these types of things. And now it's I mean, it's just kind of, the internet feels like it's dying, where I just see
Yeah.
this kind of slop every day, and just like the same, fucking giga chat image, uh or giga
Yes.
chat, or the other one, just these like stupid
Yes.
comics that like, express the most facile political beliefs, but you put yourself as the giga chad, so that, I mean, it's just garbage.
Yes, but again, that's a good example of the thing I was saying earlier about why I feel Caravaggio is so worth thinking about today, which is that in the beginning, right, when the meme thing was at least very creative and interesting, if nothing else, it was obviously associated with extreme taboo breaking, right? Because the internet allowed you
Mm,
to say basically anything you want without consequence. Um, so, and if nothing else, I mean, can be horrible in many ways, but it's still kind of was at least an interesting experiment, right? Like we didn't know where it was going to go really. Um, but because you don't have the uh the confining element that kind of that says, okay, you've broken this taboo, you've unveiled this rude thing that is true but that we don't say because we live in a civilization that's bound by all of these rules. But now what? Like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? So if you don't have the element that restricts you and forces you to channel the antisocial energy into something, then you're just saying rude stuff on the internet and you just, I don't know, go about your day. You know what I mean? There's no reason for you to channel the antisocial feeling into something that produces something great, So that's
mm,
why the internet is kind of a good example of how the taboo breaking kind of Wild West like internet is an example of what happens when there's no um there's nothing constraining you, but then the other side of it, the kind of like the left, like the social shaming element to it, which is far too constraining,
mm,
that crushes the antisocial personality. The other side just wastes them because they have no reason to channel their energies into anything. So that's why I just think Caravaggio should be for us a symbol of why that is such an important thing for us to do at this time. We have to find a way to do to stop these precious kind of exceptional people from being either not disciplined or being totally crushed and removed from society for being rule breaking or whatever.
Well, my last question for you, Angela, was what, if anything, can be done to revitalize interest in Caravaggio, but also in protecting and supporting the next Caravaggio? Because my instinct would just be this would require the government, this would require the state. But what do you think of that? Do you think there are other options, other things we can be doing?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I mean, I guess we're at the transition point where um, we're at this transition that I think the internet has brought about, which is basically that you have endless opportunity for taboo breaking and endless opportunity for social shaming. Now, the taboo breaking side of that is starting to win out now. But I mean, who knows? The pendulum may swing back, and how that's enforced is really through kind of ultimately violence, state violence, or maybe kind of vigilante violence, which is probably backed by the state, ultimately. So there are certain taboos that are just so big that it's hard to know, like, if what will happen as they are broken. I mean, the famous theories of civilization that come to mind. I've written about this years ago. I wrote this piece for the Baffler, which was sort of about this, which was basically that the theories that I remember reading about, and like in terms of what is civilization. One of them was Freud's Civilization is Discontents, and the other was Norbert Elias, who wrote about the civilizing process. And both, in a way, sort of agreed that it's a process of manners, and that manners are a way to kind of physically and emotionally and libidinally constrain people from a very early age. And and both agree that these things are in some sense oppressive to us, but that they're also necessary for civilization to even exist. Because if they didn't, we would just go around raping everyone or doing whatever we want, like, I don't know, just like doing whatever we want all the time, just out of pure like animal feelings. We wouldn't have any reason to, cover our nose when we sneeze or whatever it might be. Um, so like so those are the things. So manners are the things that kind of make civilization work, basically. And everyone has to be kind of punished to some degree into accepting them. So, with something like that, we're at this time where, very much like, I guess, the early printing press, where things haven't really shaken out yet. Like, we don't know what ideas are going to survive and what kind of taboos are going to survive. And is it possible for the state to accept, to accept an entirely new set of parameters for how to kind of enforce like a basic control of society to keep things going. I mean, that's all a very long-winded way of saying, this is just a transition period. And so because it's transitional, at least the first phase of it was simply, well, no, we're actually still in the phase where it's you have to hurt people who, are going against the rules. But maybe that won't last and something else will come after that. So maybe it's the case that for this to work, for there to be a Caravaggio, you need leaders, or at least some people, maybe a minority of people within the leadership, who understand that you can't just be very, that there is magic in the in the breaking of taboos and in like breaking conventions, and you can't just be scared of that and always, reprimanding people and punishing people for it. Because if you do that, your culture will die, your society will die. All the people who are capable of producing soft power that you actually need, the state needs, are going to be, they're never going to produce anything. So, I mean, I'm kind of going back to where I started in this conversation, which is that this is the conundrum of state soft power. They need to channel antisocial energy because that creates new ideas, new art, new everything. Because by definition, right, you're breaking with something that was the norm before. You need a bit of antisocial energy to do that. But they have to walk that kind of fine line, but where they have to allow that to get the best out of the best people, but they still have to maintain control of society because that's just the reality of statecraft. If there is another space for people like that, it's going to be in that kind of area between those two things, balancing the realities of statecraft with the more enlightened patron kind of attitude, understanding that Del Monte had, that was that you need to allow that space to exist in order to get the best out of the best people, because they will always be in whatever. It's not always art. It could be science. It could be history, whatever it might be. The best stuff is always going to come out of those antisocial people.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for elevating my cultural knowledge. I'm looking forward to having conversations where I pass off your opinions as my own and being praised for my trenchant insights. But I want to thank you, the listener, for being here with us. We will continue the conversation about Caravaggio in the comments, so please sound off there. And please also consider supporting us and becoming a premium subscriber. As mentioned, either patreon.com/Rocinantepod or angelanagel.substack.com. We will continue this conversation there. We'll have a Q&A and a current events episode for you. But until then, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.